Craig Minervini, we'll start it off really simple, really easy. Who is Craig DeGeorge?
I liked him. He was one of my favorite wrestling announcers. He was an alter ego. A job I had with the World Wrestling Federation. I went there. I signed a contract as Craig Minervini. I went to the first show as Craig Minervini. I was only supposed to watch at the Sun Dome in South Florida, University campus. And all of a sudden, a half an hour before that first show, Gene Okerlund says, "Hey, the big guy wants you to do something." Okay, great. "And by the way, he wants you to change your name." 5 minutes?
What was it about working with WWF, interviewing all the talent there? What was that like? Because you were very young when you got into that.
I was only 23, 24, or somewhere around there. I had one job under my belt, aside from all those things that we did in Syracuse. But when I did AAA baseball at college, did game shows. So I didn't feel out of place, let's put it that way, from a broadcast standpoint. Now, what was different to me was, in this wacky world of wrestling, behind the scenes, which was something I didn't know much about, that was the challenge, is to get used to that. But the characters were great. I got to know them very quickly. Vince couldn't have been more supportive. Phil Harmon, the guy who brought me in there, Executive Vice President, Titan Sports, who I met at Madison Square Gardens a couple of years prior to that. That's people, the wrestlers, look, Jim, I'm used to it, and you are, and sometimes it's like pulling teeth to try and get a soundbite or an interview. Not the case in wrestling. You never had a boring interview.
Craig, was there a connection between Syracuse and WWE, WWF?
No, there's not, even though I went to school with Sean Coulthard, who is now and has been the voice of the Monday Night Raw for years, Michael Cole. He was a couple years younger than me, I think. But no connection from Syracuse, just the fact I went there, and the only connection for me, I met a guy named Bruce Beck, was a New York sportscaster when he was in MSG. He was doing a football game, a Rutgers-Syracuse game at the Carrier Dome. And I went up to him, I grew up on Long Island, I said, "Hey, are there any internships at MSG?" So he gave me the name of somebody. I contacted him, and I got that internship the following summer. And by getting that internship, which is a great lesson for anybody, by getting that internship, I made some contacts while I was in college. One of them was with this gentleman, Mr. Harmon, who went on to Titan Sports and called me, unbeknownst to me, that he even knew too much about my whereabouts, and called me in West Virginia, and basically, job, pending an interview with Vince McMahon.
What was that interview like, and did you know how big Vince McMahon was even at that time?
Well, I knew he was about 6'3", very bulky, yes. That's not what you're talking about. Yes, I was aware. Listen, Jim, I grew up in New York. I watched Vince McMahon growing up, but then he was just the commentator for his father's business. And he was great, and I watched him very closely. I loved watching the wrestling interviews with Vince and the play-by-play that he did. And, all of that, which was the same even when I worked with him. But I was aware how big the business was. I just hadn't been following it, working in sports. My first job, I'm engrossed in that. So I didn't know much beyond Hogan and Savage, who the characters were. But I learned that quickly. I started watching about a month before I joined on and got to know all the key people and felt comfortable pretty much from the get-go.
And Craig, when you were younger, were you a big fan? Were you a moderate fan or occasional? Because as you said, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, that whole area, when his father ran, that was the Northeast was WWF, WWE.
Yeah, or WWF, I think it was even called, Jim, at the time. I would say moderate fan. I would always flip around WR TV, which is where they aired that show as a kid, and I'd always watch. If I flipped around and wrestling was on, I watched a good chunk of it. But I was more of a fan of the television angle of how they, I was the kind of guy, I love the athletes, but I would be the guy who would hang around the TV booth or the radio booth at an Islander game. I was almost more into the announcers than the athletes. And, I loved watching the games, but to me, there was nothing like Bob Murphy saying, "Hey to me." Well, hey everybody, I'm Bob Murphy. This is the Mets pregame show brought to you by Japer and Japer Light. Premium taste and price right. Or Marv Elmer. I was in the sound-alike contest. And there's coming to our left at the 8th Avenue end, and Bill Smith to our right at the 7th Avenue end.
So Craig, you are one of the Albert brothers. I knew it.
Yeah, I actually made it to the finals of the Marv Albert sound-alike contest, but I finished a pointing third. And Mike Fratello wants to talk it over.
He does a Mike Fratello reference, broadcaster, Atlanta Hawk coach extraordinaire. And you mentioned Bob Murphy. When you said that name, I initially thought, Kiner's Corner.
Well, I got to get to know Bob Murphy when he did the Met games. I was doing the Marlins course, and he knew me because he lived in West Palm, which is where I worked. So it was really cool. It's a cool thing, I think, for anybody, probably yourself, and people can relate to. Growing up as putting on somebody as a hero, and then getting to know them, and they know who you are by name. That's cool. And so Bob and I became friends. I got to interview him a little bit on our Marlins show, and I used to do a bit, Jim, when I was about 7 years old. Bob Murphy used to do a bit selling the Mets yearbook on the game. And he would hold the yearbook up, kind of like, I have the yearbook actually in the other room, but he would hold the yearbook up like this and say, the Mets yearbook is now on sale. 64 pages in full color. All the pictures are suitable for grading. Go great in your baseball library. Order your Mets yearbook for $1.25. The Mets yearbook, Post Office Box 10, Shea Stadium, New York. Use the zip code 11368.
It's great that you remember that. And I want to tell too, Craig, I'm in South Florida, living in South Florida at the time, and we got WOR. So I saw the Mets. I saw the WWF, as you said, you're right. Before WWF, it was WWF. Watching those on midnight, we used to get it on midnight here on WOR, and Vince McMahon Jr. doing the commentary. I mean, that's, to me, was just classic times, classic sports, classic pro wrestling. And for you, it must have been just a very great time being in that area.
Absolutely. Being a big New York fan, sports fan, my dad was a huge fan. That's why I got into it probably. I used to ref his hockey games, and, he was a big Rangers fan, Mets fan, Giants. On basketball, he used to say the last 2 minutes, but I would always flip over and watch a Knick game as well, Bernard King and even Willis Reed, back to the Busher and those guys. So I was an all-sports fan, but I centered more on the other three than basketball until I went to Syracuse, and then I really got into hoops because it's such a big deal. We got to do games in front of 30,000. I loved it. In fact, I watched the game earlier. They were in the tournament, the ACC tournament, and I really got into it again this week, watching them play. So I have done the Heat games too, and I'll tell you what, when I covered the Heat for NBC over here and got, I can get into a sport. It doesn't take me long when you start watching for me to get into a sport, no matter what it is. So, and I've done some offbeat stuff too. Put about 4 leagues out of business single-handedly. So I like all sports. Roller hockey, UFL, a fight league. Oh, wait, after I started XFL.
Craig, come on, Craig. Just doing it. Come on. Because, hey, but I'll say this, though. I think that the pluses far outweigh the minuses.
I hope so. But, yeah, they were doing a round of the XFL. And it was a great job, and I love doing it with Bob Golick, Mike Golick's brother, who played in the NFL also. And we only 1 year, we thought we were coming back, and we wound up not coming back, unfortunately. And I got UFL with Doug Flutie, and that was great too. And all these were great experiences. Just unfortunately, they didn't last. Yes, there it is. Oh, nice. That's a football somewhere up here.
Craig, you're a man of many hats, and I have many hats here to support that for Craig Minervini / Craig DeGeorge. We go from WWE, but still, WrestleMania, we got the Sports Entertainment Pro Wrestling, and then to the XFL, since you're talking about that, and I was going to bring that up, so that's good. I want to talk about...
Well, I got my jacket still.
Oh, the jackets, I know. We're going to take a look at those, because those are going to be great. You mentioned Mean Gene Okerlund. What was it like working with Mean Gene?
Jim, very sad that not to work with him, but that we lost him because he was the greatest guy ever. And I had tried to connect with him a few times. He called me, I called him. We text back and forth. We almost saw each other about 5 different times. One time I was in New York. He was in Brooklyn. He had a show. Often he would say, I'll try and go and see your son's hockey game because he loved hockey. And he lived over in Sarasota. My son would play on the youth junior circuit here. And we just kept missing. And you always feel like you're going to, all right, I'll see you next time. And it never did. And it's because he was, as nice as it comes, great mentor. Playing that big guy or who's the young kid trying to take my gig. He's the best. Nobody's even close to what Gene Okerlund did, but I learned a lot from him. And most importantly, he was a great friend and helped. I got to the... He could not have been nicer.
Craig, who were some of your favorites to work with? And there's a who's who list. You worked with everybody back in that 80s era of WWF, WWE, pro wrestling when it was at that time.
Well, but we could go down the list. I don't know if there was somebody I didn't like working with. I mean, they were all different. The one thing that was I got there by Phil Harmon was that Vince is basically like the puppeteer, and he can actually do all of the puppets, the voices, the characters, even better than the wrestler could do himself. I mean, he would go on a 2-minute spiel, say something like this without stuttering, like Macho Man, like Hogan, like whomever, and it was unbelievable to watch that. And I got to interview all those different characters. And they were all different. They all treated me like, get out of my way, kind of. But they were nice, to be off stage. And then on stage, I was just, the idiot TV guy, right? Getting elbowed or pushed or, I didn't like the Snake Damien too much. I wasn't a fan of Damien. And didn't really care for do-si-doing with Hillbilly Jim on national television. That wasn't a career thrill. Or getting Cowboy Ron Bass to snap that. What do they call that thing?
Was it Betsy?
Betsy, oh my God, he almost killed me 3 times doing that. Or getting elbowed by Andre the Giant at the Spectrum when I'm doing an interview. I'm holding my arm way out, trying to hold it up. And he had a way of stopping before he continued his next sentence. So I'm holding, actually with my right arm, this, and he pulled as a minute, right? So after he stopped talking, all right, I'll show. I was on the Prism, not on the network. Prism only in Philly. Anyway, I grabbed the mic, and he grabs the mic with his left hand like this, pulls it away, and with his right arm elbows me right in the gut, and he goes, I'm not finished talking yet. And welcome to the WWF, folks. What am I getting into?
I hope you had good medical insurance at the time.
I think that was one of the good things about Titan Sport medical plan, yes.
And you've done so many interviews, and there were long days where you guys would just go to one place, whether it be a room and a conference room or a hotel room area, and just one interview after the other. What was that like, Craig? And just was that like a first to do something like that for you?
Well, for me it was because it was so unusual. But remember, back in those days, young fans wouldn't know this, older fans wouldn't. The interviews in, let's say, 60, probably to 80 markets were custom for the next show that's coming to town. And I don't know when they started that, but let's say 3 months out, you're coming to Indianapolis. For 3 months, you'd have a localized interview, 3 of them, 2 minutes and 24 seconds long, in each show. and there was Superstars and Challenge were the two main shows. So these interviews had to be done on a weekly basis for the markets they were going to. And then in the other 200 markets, or whatever the number was, they would have a generic interview run where just about the feud that was going on. But for the most part, they were customized for the. We're coming to the Von Braun Civic Center in Huntsville, Tuesday. I read the card, bring the guy in. And then the next one would be, we're going to the Springfield Civic Center or the O'Hara Arena, wherever that was, in Ohio, or, the card would be there. And then after about 10 or 15, Hogan would always go, okay, brother, bring it. He would warm up with Erie, Pennsylvania, and smaller cities, Austin, Texas, and then all of a sudden bring on New York and LA. And we did, I would do literally over 100 interviews. I think up to 120 was a max in one day, one after another. 20 with one guy. Billy Jack Haynes comes in. Jimmy Hart and Honky Tonk for 20. Hogan for 20. And all day long they would come in with that blue backdrop, and that's how we did it to get all those interviews.
And Craig, when they're doing it too, do you see their levels going up and down? You can tell right away, this one's really got it. This one can do it. Where others, it might be a little harder just because they're doing so many at one time.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it was a similar shtick because it wasn't scripted, but you didn't see what he said. He might do the same thing for, Ohio that he did for New York or a different city, or sometimes they would localize it too. But for the most part, they didn't have to come up with new stuff. It was just whatever they wanted to say about the match. New town. That town. And then obviously in a different town, it would be personalized. Sometimes they messed up and sent the wrong interview. I can always remember the Springfield mascot sent to Springfield, Missouri, and what? And I would always throw in, fans in Holyoke, fans up in Hartford, fans run, come on in, kind of some of the towns. And that didn't play real well in Missouri. Like, where's Hartford?
And Poughkeepsie. Don't forget Poughkeepsie.
Poughkeepsie was for the Albany market, or yes, we come on out to the Glen Falls Civic Center, home of Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Hello.
Hacksaw Jim Duggan. He'd bring on Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Ladies and gentlemen, Hacksaw Jim Duggan played his college football at SMU, and he took a pay cut to play in the NFL. Come on in.
That is so great. All right, Craig, you got a special event coming up, and we're going to talk a little longer, but we got a special event coming up that you're involved in, and I want to make sure I get all the information right here because it's the 80s. We're looking back at the 80s, and basically you're going to be doing a virtual meet and greet signing, and it's let's see if I got this right, Craig, and I know you could tell me more about it. WrestleCon, 80s WrestleCon, and they do these virtual meet and greets and autograph signings, and you're going to be a part of it, and I believe this may be your very first one. Monday, March 22nd, 7 to 10 p.m. Tell us about it. Hey, Cowboy Bob Ace Orton will be there too on that night, so just tell us a little about it and all the particulars and anything you can correct me on.
Thank you, Jim. You got everything right. It's 80swrestlingcon.com for information. Con.com for information. Basically, they're doing it with all the persons known to the wrestling community. It's a neat thing for me as a broadcaster, so down on the totem pole, but neat for me to be able to do this because the interviews run. Even fans who didn't watch it when it was live have gotten to watch it now on the WWE, which is relived the 80s. So I'm doing a virtual. I'm actually going to be in a room and Tuesday. I guess fans can go online, get the photo. I'll sign that photo. We'll do a little talk back, and they'll send that photo out to you. So it's kind of a neat thing. They've done it with a lot of wrestlers. I think Jake Roberts is coming up, and a who's who list. And it'll be a thrill for me to do it. We've been talking to them for like a couple of years and just haven't been able to work it out, so I'm going up. It's going to be fun.
I think it's going to be cool, too, because you are part of history with WWE, and you haven't done these before. and it's just very cool and nostalgic, and fans like this. They like looking back and being able to communicate with you or get an autograph, something like that. I know you've been very busy in the sports world. What do you remember about fans back then? Do you know anything, too, about fans today and just how they are? Or do you ever get any comments on social media about Craig DeGeorge?
Oh, it's unbelievable. Almost every day somebody's posting some interview that I haven't seen in 30 years. And I'll tell you what else I've noticed, Jim, recently is I'm getting, every now and then, I'll get a letter in the mail, usually a picture, I don't even have one here maybe, of some wrestling shot, and some 30-year-old or young fan or even older fan wants me to sign a picture. They send me the picture with a self-addressed envelope. And it happens more often than you think, which is amazing to me because I haven't been done a WWF event in over 30 years. 32 years, 33 years. Unbelievable, right? So that was one. I'll tell you one story. I remember the first show I did, I came up with this new name. I didn't even know the name. I came up with it because it's my mother's maiden name. Kind of talked to her. We did it. I go on this show. Vince McMahon throws it down to me over a loud, roaring crowd. He goes, "Let's go down and Craig DeGeorge." You couldn't even hear the name completely. I do my little, very short shtick. That show aired like on a Sunday or Saturday. And I think on the next day, after it aired, we were in Baltimore or somewhere. And I was walking, I heard 2 or 3 fans say, "Oh my gosh, that's Craig DeGeorge." Now, I don't know how they knew my name. "Let's go down and Craig DeGeorge." Yeah, you couldn't hear it when I did. And I shook my head and said, "What am I getting myself into here? This is unbelievable." And I don't know. I'm not off color. This isn't a curse, but another time, my friends enjoyed this one. You can edit this out Jim, if you want. But we were leaving the Spectrum, me and 2 buddies, and above us there were 2 fans who goes, "Hey, there's Craig the douchebag." Anyway, I never forgot that. So it went both ways.
It went both ways, but better it goes both ways than no ways.
The fans were unbelievable. For me, it was really kind of being just the guy telling the story that I was part of that atmosphere, and that people knew who you were, and that's neat. But yeah, so it was cool. I mean, I was in West Virginia on a local station, 143rd Market, and literally overnight I was on 260 markets, around the country. So that was cool, and it was big time television, and it was neat.
And the thing of that, too, is that happened to you back then. Do you imagine if that was today, just with all technology and social media, your followers would just have gone through the roof?
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're right. You're right. I never thought about that. Yeah, if I was on doing that today, you'd be up in hundreds of thousands of followers, or that's how it is. But it was as big as it gets back in the day, in the mid-'80s. I mean, it was a highly rated syndicated show. So I was seen by a lot of people, even people who are wrestlers today, who would have seen me when they were kids, or young people. And that's neat, because it wasn't like quiet. I mean, everybody knew WWF. And other than Mean Gene Okerlund, I had the most airtime, visually, because I was on doing interviews. I was always on camera. Not like the play-by-play guys.
Craig, when that run was over, did you still want to be involved with pro wrestling? Because you ended up going into another sport dynamic, and now you're very involved with the Florida Panthers, very involved with the Miami Marlins. At that time, was that the venue you wanted to go after, the path you wanted to take, or did you still want to stay with pro wrestling?
Well, it would have been neat to stay longer, but it didn't work out that way. They made decided to make a change, and I was a little stunned. I knew Vince liked me, and I thought I was doing a good job. Having said that, Jim, I'm more of a meat-and-potatoes sports guy to begin with, and my goal wasn't to stay there forever, per se. So getting back into the regular sports world was not an adjustment. It was just trying to get that job again, which was a little tricky. ended up getting a job on Long Island, and then I came down to Florida, and that's how I got to Florida. Got a job at the West Palm Beach affiliate. But I wanted to stay in sports, obviously, in the sports side of things. There weren't other wrestling options, really. And then I wound up getting calls, and I did the UWF for Herb Abrams for a few years. I would go up to New York and do that. I did a pay-per-view show. I worked with Bruno Sammartino. I worked with a lot of the people that I worked with at the WWF who came over. And Lou Albano I got to work with, who I didn't catch at the WWF, but I got to know him pretty well at UWF because Herb had every cast off from the WWF there. So that was neat. And then I did some other shows. I did a show for Hiro Matsuda, famous Japanese wrestler. Had a show in Tampa. They were videotapes would come in from. It was a very strange combination of Japanese and Mexican wrestling. I remember Jushin Thunder Liger. It was unbelievable. Great athlete. And I would do the show with Oliver Humperdinck. And I don't know where it aired. I never saw one.
That would be awesome if we were able to, because Hiro Matsuda, especially championship wrestling from Florida, legendary name around the world. Sir Oliver Humperdinck, one of the greatest talkers, managers of all time. I didn't even know you worked with him and did that. I knew you did the UWF. You got to do commentary with the great Bruno Sammartino. And you mentioned it, but geez, when you're thinking about all that, gosh, Craig, those are just like top of the line moments.
Yeah, a UWF show was fun. It was also on national television. It was on Sports Channel America. So again, it wasn't seen just in a local market. It was around nationally. And Bruno did the color. And then we had Sunny Beach. And not everybody was a big name in the ring, but there were a lot of guys. Dr. Death, Steve Williams. There were a bunch of guys came over from the WWF. I can't remember everybody, but it was a who's list. I mean, you knew pretty much all the wrestlers. And then some up-and-comer guys who probably later on moved on to the WWF. And I remember the Boogie Woogie Man was there. Valiant. Very thin by the time we saw him. And Jim, there was a show we did it was a pay-per-view show, and he came around the ring, and he had all those tattoos and very, very brawny. And he kissed me, unbeknownst. Ah! Got it out. I said, honey, you're still a better kid. The Boogie Woogie Man.
Right there, you were indoctrined, though. You were indoctrined. You were now welcome. You were one of the boys.
I could have done without that indoctrination. Yeah.
And
that was fun, though. UWF. Herb was an interesting guy.
Yeah, he was an interesting character. My gosh, yes. But mentioning those names and Bruno, I was huge into Bruno, so that's just legendary. Hey, you still have some old. Speaking of, so fans when they're able to see you on Monday, what I'm gonna say is, will Craig Minervini / Craig DeGeorge on Monday, March 22nd, WrestleCon, you're Craig DeGeorge, WrestleCon, so will Craig DeGeorge have any of that old jacket, those great jackets that I love?
I'm going to dust it off here. See it?
Yes, I can.
This one was cool.
Oh, the powder blue. This is my favorite.
You know what I think of when I see this jacket? I think of Lord Alfred Hayes. Lord Alfred Hayes. I got that show. What was that show, Jim? This was the one. It was Superstars and Challenge were the two shows in the arena, and then we did like a weekly recap. Wrestling. The heck, that's crazy.
No, I don't remember that. I remember Superstars and Challenge.
We would sit on a desk with the studio behind us. Well, this was like a weekly recap show.
I remember that. I think there was Saturdays on USA Network. I do know the show you were talking about, but I just don't remember the name of it. Because it was like you were in the truck. I remember that. It was like you guys were in the truck and you had all the TV monitors behind you, and you would stand there and the powder blue jacket.
Right. Yeah.
And by the way, That powder.
For the first year we were in Maryland.
Oh no, go ahead, Craig, and then I'll follow up. Go ahead about Maryland.
No, I was just saying we were in Maryland the first year because they didn't even have a studio in Connecticut. Vince built the studio the next year, and that's when we went to Connecticut. I used to have to go to Maryland. I would fly from Long Island to Baltimore all the time, every week, and go to Owings Mills, Maryland, to a production house there. And that's where we did all the shows. Everything was taped out of there. I think even the Tuesday Night Titans show was taped out of there, I believe.
That is so. I never knew that about Maryland too. But then obviously then they built and they moved everything. Yeah. But I even wonder how the heck they picked that spot out, because that seems so random.
It's down there. I don't know why. And maybe they did the Titans show in the studio in New York. Because I never was there for the taping of that show, but for our show, all the production staff was based at that place. In other words, and when the shows were done, everything would go back there, and that's where they edited and produced all the shows. And then we would go in to do special report, my updates. This is a special report with Craig DeGeorge from the pages of the World Wrestling Federation magazine. I would flip through, and I would write a script for those shows. And we had sound bites, and it was usually promoting something going on, maybe. Or Matilda's health, which was a big story back in the day.
You mentioned about script writing, and I never thought of that, Craig. Did Vince oversee? I know he was very micromanaging. So did he have to oversee all the scripts? You would write your own script, and then he'd go over it and say, okay, we want to change this to do that?
Not on those shows. Those shows when I was in Maryland, that was really the only thing I ever wrote out anything, because everything else was pretty much ad-lib. They would go over it in a general sense, but there was no script when we did the shows for live TV. But the show, when I would do a special report or an update, we would have certain sound bites that we'd have to get to, whatever the topic was, from the pages of the World Wrestling. And then I would write a script for that with a teleprompter and switch cameras and all that. But no, he never, not to my knowledge. I mean, I don't believe they ever sent those to him. There would be a producer that worked on him. Occasionally there would be some changes, but for the most part, I went to school for broadcast journalism. There's a certain way to write for the ear, oral, they call it, A-U-R. You write the ear, not the eye. You don't get a second shuffle than you would in a magazine, because you don't get to reread it. You only get, there was no VCR or deep, but turn it back, So there's this way to say it, the way to write it, and an active voice and all that stuff. So I would write it, and pretty much it's my script.
I think that part right there in itself is very interesting, because here's a young, up-and-coming sports broadcaster, and you were given a little bit of freedom to do some of those things in that world.
A little bit, yes, a little bit. In other words, we had a point to make, right? It was just my words, my style per se, that would, the way I hammered it out. And for the most part, I'm doing it like I think one of the reasons, Jim, they hired me is that I was a sportscaster. I'm a sportscaster by nature, so I'm not a screaming wrestling guy, that typical wrestling announcer, or maybe didn't have a sports credibility. Some guys would just, sort of. So I was more of the anchorman / reporter, and that's the role I played. And it was natural for me to play that. So for the most part, they let me go and write what I wanted to write. That wasn't always the case, but for the most part, that's how it was.
Anchorman, Ron Burgundy, Santiago or San Diego?
Stay classy, Baltimore. Stay classy.
And that's so great. Craig, you had that blue jacket, and when I saw the blue jacket, by the way, Craig also works for the Miami Marlins. Pro Wrestling Night at Marlins Park. Craig brings out the light powder blue jacket to call the matches after the Marlins game. What was that whole thing like? You just another great experience.
That was fun. They set up the ring, and I remember Tom Kohler and a couple of our guys, I think AJ Ramos really got into it. They loved it, and they had that aluminum thing, the can, and they were practicing, and Goldberg told them to really hit him. And he didn't want to do it. He was like soft. He says, "Look, dude," and he hit it on his leg. He said, "Just hit me." And so they slammed him with that. It looked like a hood of a car, but it was Bret the Hitman Hart was there. He did color, and Jimmy Hart was there. Some familiar faces. I don't know how much these guys remember me. I'm assuming they did. When I got there, they remembered me. But it's been a long time, But probably from seeing the interviews, they realized it was the same guy. I mean, I didn't keep in touch with a lot of those guys, but people you wouldn't normally run into, except for like Gene Okerlund and those guys over the years.
Well, I think too, because of social media and YouTube, just all technology, everyone could go back, including them, and see, Craig, yeah, I remember Craig, and do that. So I think that was there. You mentioned Tom Kohler. You mentioned Tom. Tom is huge Goldberg fan. I remember he caught the pitch. Goldberg threw out the first pitch. He caught it. Then there was a fan heckling right there by the mound. And what does Goldberg do but spear him? He spears the fan because he was getting heckled after he threw the pitch. The video goes up. Stories start posting. But it starts to go that Tom Kohler was the one who was speared, and that was not true. It was a heckling fan, just happened to be near the mound. But Kohler said that it wasn't me. I didn't get speared.
As I recall, if I'm not mistaken, a heck of a clothesline. That guy took a bump, big time.
Oh, it was a spear. It was Goldberg's spear. He took it well. Goldberg didn't hold back. And that fan wasn't heckling after that.
No.
But I remember interviewing Tom Kohler, and he would say to me, now from now on till the rest of my life, I'll be the pitcher or the guy that was speared by Goldberg at Marlins Park. I said, well, that's a good badge of honor too, Tom. He goes, I marked out though. I love Goldberg. And then you're right. He told me that story too, where Goldberg said to him, hit me with that car hood. Just hit me with it. Don't hold back. And AJ and him, AJ Ramos, the executioner. Oh, no, wait. AJ Ramos, the Mexecutioner. and Tom Kohler was Dino. I never got why Dino, but I think he changed the name for whatever reason after that. And then they did. They did end up hitting him and all. But those were some good times. And you, Craig, tell us what the Marlins. We're going to wrap this up, but tell us what you're doing with the Marlins.
Yeah. Well, I'll be back with the Marlins hosting their pre and post game shows off the playoff season. I'm doing that with the Panthers right now, who look like they're on their way to the playoffs here as we speak in this time of the year. Here in March of 2021. Yeah. Oh, there it is. Very nice. They're looking good, and the Marlins have a lot of excitement in a very tough division. They're going to hopefully get through 162 games this year. Cross your fingers. Hopefully everybody stays healthy. And they're certainly going to be exciting. And they're going to have fans back in. I think up to 8,000, something like that, 8,500 at Marlins Park. So that'll be neat to see the fans. It was very strange, Jim, last year being at those games. Home games with the crowd and the road games where we would actually be at Marlins Park where you're one of 12 people in the whole park. Very unusual to do a baseball game in that environment. Any sport for that matter. So it's good to have all the fans back.
It's almost like doing a Gulf Coast League game up in Jupiter at the back fields.
You're exactly right. It reminded me of a high school game or walking in a building where like you get to like the Carrier Dome in Syracuse. The lights used to have a sound. It was a buzzing noise. And when you got there early and nobody was there, and that's how it's eerie, actually, that you would have no sound, until the game started and they roar, the crowd roar for a major league game. But I had said before, and I think they will do it. I didn't know they'd do it to this extent. They have to. It really would feel like a high school game.
Well, what's interesting, Craig, you've been in South Florida for a while on local TV, sports broadcasts, as a sports anchor, interviewing all the teams, all the talent, and you've been working with the Marlins and the Panthers doing the pre-show, post-show, a lot of things. It's just so wonderful, interesting, outstanding to see you do something you love. And we're just grateful down in South Florida to be able to have your talents. And it's so funny because when I talk to a Roberto Luongo of the Panthers or Keith Yandel of the Panthers, two big wrestling fans, or Tom Kohler, or even Logan Morrison when he was with the Marlins, not a huge wrestling fan, and I say, do you know Craig Minervini was Craig DeGeorge and worked for WWF? And their eyes light up.
Yeah, because they're at that age where they didn't remember it compared to, let's say, 20 years ago covering sports, or in the 90s, let's say. I was only off about 7-8 years from that. So it was very much in the mind of the athletes you covered then. Now, the guy, you're born in 1985, right? Is that, am I doing my math right? He's 35 years old? Yeah, 35, 36. So, unless he was Goo Gaga over wrestling, you probably didn't remember Craig DeGeorge.
But they did because they were able to see you on YouTube. And then when they were able to see you on YouTube, they would show everybody else. And they would just love it. They loved it and all. So I'm just curious, do you recall just any of them coming up to you and saying, oh, Craig DeGeorge, eh?
Yeah. Well, Logan used to do it all the time, yes. I remember, who else? Ronnie Cycling with the Heat. He would always make a comment or two. He was a big fan. And I went to Syracuse when he was there, too. So there would always be a DeGeorge comment. And it was always a great little icebreaker in the clubhouse or a dressing room or something. If somebody knew somebody said, hey, because it's a topic that everybody liked to talk about, their favorite villain or their favorite wrestler. So, yeah, it came up, quite a bit. More so, I would say, then. Let's face it, Jim, right now we don't have much contact with the wrestlers, with the athletes. We're on Zoom. Yeah. We do an interview that's a little impersonal. It's just hard right now. But, you lose touch a little.
Keith Yandel, I want to end it with Keith because actually, no, I'm not going to end it with Keith, but I will say this with Keith. 1,000 consecutive games. Am I correct on that, Craig?
Hit the 1,000 mark in regular games. He's approaching the 900 mark in consecutive games, which is third all time.
It's just amazing.
Actually, he's not far from the record of Doug Jarvis, which I thought it's 947 or something like that. So by next year, he could break the all-time record. I think it's something like that. I could be wrong.
Any of the athletes, Craig, or sports commentators, broadcasters who have an affinity to pro wrestling and involved in it, or fans, they're always high on my list. So I'm a big Keith Yandel fan, and I've got to interview him a few times, and we basically talk a little hockey, but mostly pro wrestling. And what is just this team? We'll get with the Panthers, and I had one more thing to touch with you, but this team and how they're playing and the comebacks that they're making. And last night, Keith had a huge assist on the tying goal, which was really cool. 3-goal comeback in the third period, and then they win in overtime. But what has it been like with this year's Panthers finally?
You know what's nice to hear? I was just talking to one of my bosses at Fox, and he said our ratings are way up. For a while, no one was watching the Panthers, unfortunately. It's nice to hear you asking me about them. It's nice to be in the street and somebody, hey, how about the Cats? Or I still referee ice hockey games down here. And sometimes somebody says, I'll say it's not me or a joke, but, there's a lot of talk around the rinks and the community now about hockey. And it's a sport that's near and dear to my heart since I was a kid, through my family. My father used to play. So that's the best thing to me is that they're re-engaging with the community. There's a long if you go on a playoff run, get to the play, you really can build up that fan base that you lost a little bit over the years. Exciting hockey is fun. Hopefully the fans will be back even more than they've been allowed to come back right now. The comebacks have been great. The coach is outstanding. Bill Zito, the new GM, has done a great job changing the culture a little bit, bringing some new guys in. Been a surprise, I think, to a lot of people that they're this good. And hopefully the second half of the year will play out the same way. But right now they're playing great hockey.
And the Marlins, that you had mentioned, what an incredible season they came off of, because anybody outside, teams that always seems to me, athletes and teams, they always believe they're going to do well. But when you're an outsider looking in and you see a team like the Marlins, on paper, it really didn't look like much. But wow, they made the playoffs, not only making the playoffs, but they beat the Cubs in the opening round. To me, that was shortened season. Who cares? What an incredible run by the Marlins, young Marlins.
Great run last year. Now the tough act to follow is going to be, can you do it over 162 in this division? Don Mattingly told me not too long ago he thinks the fact that they're in a tough division will be a benefit to them because the other teams will beat up each other as well. So the Marlins are going to have to win their share of games, and going to the playoffs is not going to be easy this year by any stretch because of the road. They're going back to I wish they would add another team like they did last year. Yeah, get that floppy hat on. But it's great talking to you, Gilligan, by the way. Love your show.
Hey, Skipper.
But we'll see what happens.
I was going to go with traditional. But I love the floppy hat giveaways. And there were many in Marlins history. But so cool. And
maybe that's because who did we recently? Who was it that passed? One of them passed away recently. Was it? I'm not sure. Was it Ginger or
Marianne?
Who?
Marianne.
That was Don Wells. Yeah. And I think we lost Mrs. Howell some years ago. Right?
I don't know for sure, but I'm going to go with Craig. If Craig Minervini says it, then it's gospel. Yes.
Jim, she was 70 when the show was.
Yeah, you're right about that. I know. Years ago, Richie. I missed the joke. We can talk about next time. We're going to talk about Richie because that was a whole nother thing about Richie. Is he a pro wrestling fan? How does he do the comedy bit? We will do that another time because we're going long, which is so cool because I love this. All right, so we'll end it with this because you mentioned them already. I was going to bring it out. At the end, but I'll bring it out now. So you were a part of the first original XFL, and now The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, and Danny Garcia, his former wife, business associate, do so many good things together, unbelievable. Now, Danny's like running the XFL, and I'm just curious, Craig, could we maybe see Craig Minervini in the new XFL?
I hadn't talked to them about it. I saw something today where they're looking at getting together with the CFL. Did you see that? Possible merger of some sort, which makes some sense, actually, to be the top. The NFL could use a top sort of minor league, if you will, or professional football, but not as level, which is the NFL. So that's why the XFL, I thought, had good standing, and also the UFL games that I worked on with Flutie back in 2010 or 2011, whatever year that was. So I think it's exciting. I think it's good for football players to have another outlet, and also not compete directly with the NFL, but maybe to be a feeding ground. There's a lot of guys. I remember Graham Gano was in that league that I did. The UFL was one of the top kickers, and Totska, what's his name? He's another kicker in the NFL. He's very popular. And recently, I was, maybe I shouldn't say recently, but several months ago, I saw somebody with a mask on. And I was like, I know you. And his name was Jay. So I said, Craig, and after I said, are you in sports? And he said, I was in a restaurant. And he said, well, I was. I just got fired by the Jacksonville Jaguars. And then I realized it was Jake Gruden. And I said, hey, this is no one's probably ever said this to you, but I don't know you, NFL, but I did the UFL games when you were head coach of the Florida Tuskers. And speaking of hats,
yes.
And they went to the championship. They went to the championship game at Rosenblatt Stadium of all places and played I think it was the Vegas club, Las Vegas Locos or something, whatever they were called. And actually, Jay kind of moved on from his success in the UFL. So there's your touchers.
Yes, and I don't have. My God, and that hat I don't have because I would have worn it for sure. That is such a cool hat. I think the UFL and the XFL, they may not have done well financially, but no one can downplay the hats and the mascots of the UFL and the XFL, some of the coolest around.
Absolutely. Don't forget the cheerleaders. They were pretty good too.
They were pretty good too, Craig. When Craig, you're going to now see, I'm not going away. Hang on, Craig. I may not have the UFL Jacksonville hat. San Francisco Demons, Craig.
Oh.
XFL.
Oh, wow. Is that the hat?
Yes.
The XFL, absolutely. I did a game at then, it was called Pac Bell then. Very cool because they actually put the stands on the outfield. Nobody had ever been out there, and the outfield grass. And so they shot it to the third base. The cameras and everything were, they shot into third base, basically, if you will. And the only problem was there's no bathroom up there on the bleacher stuck. And I barely made it back for the second half. You'd have to go all the way down the bleachers, out to center field, back, up, out. And same problem at the Meadowlands, where we had to go with the crowd. There was a line of 40 people at halftime. And I'm like, excuse me, I'm doing the play-by-play. Would you mind? Thank you.
Hey, especially Meadowlands. Good thing those people were nice. They can get a little cagey.
I know. I said, look, I'm a New Yorker. I had to go over to New York. Yeah, I'm a New Yorker. I'm doing the play-by-play. You know, it's the goal over here. Forget about it.
That is so good. So, Craig, XFL, maybe, possibly. That door opens, Craig. There could be Hollywood, movies, TV.
Yes, I would be interested. I would be interested, absolutely. And don't forget, 80s on CON.com. Go there for the information, sign up, and it's March 22nd from 7 to 10 p.m.
80s WrestleCon, 80sWrestleCon.com. Virtual signing, Craig DeGeorge from the WWF. And also, Ace Cowboy Bob Orton will be there as well, Monday, March 22nd. And then, as you said, so many others. Haku, Jake Roberts, the Orient Express, Skinner, Steve Kern, a Florida legend, by the way, in future shows. But the one you want to check out is Monday, March 22nd, with Craig DeGeorge. This is really a first for you. So this will be a first for fans to be able to interact virtually with you.
Yes. That'll be fun.
Thank you so much for taking the time. We're going to do this again for sure. We're going to talk about Richie and comedy as well, I promise.
All right.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Jim. Oh.
Yes.